starts off with a Trainer's Mail, hits an Ultra Ball, always a great card you want to see turn 1.
Absolutely. I really want to talk about how it's for Admassu to be starting the game. Because everybody expanded seems to be to play it on your first turn, but even had a chance to play it. All of the items in there. Shuffles it to draw a card. Night March is such an item-based, item-heavy deck. See game swing on opponent play that gets us on the first. So wouldn't even be surprised if we would say Admassu go for that strategy here against James.
Yeah, definitely. And thankfully for him, he gets to discard a Lampent with the Ultra Ball from his hand. Night March being a deck where its attack does more damage for every Night Marcher in your discard. And you have to play Lampent, but there's no way to actually use Lampent. So it's definitely the first one you want to discard.
First search always.
Day's just started, morning's still kicking in for everybody, so we got to make sure you got to be very, very careful about what's kind of prized in this kind of matchup. You really need to make sure you count your total Night Marchers and see how many of the 12 are actually going to be in the deck. But as he grabs the Tapu Lele and everything here, it's going to be really interesting to see what his opening plays are. These first couple turns really can dictate a lot of the game, not completely, but it'll be interesting. You don't really want to overextend as a Night March player because of those copies of Karen, allowing you to shuffle all Pokemon and discard piles back into the deck. So, as Jeremy was just mentioning, Night March's attack only gets stronger if you have those Night Marches in the discard pile. So Karen really shuts that strategy down completely.
All right, so here we do see the Wonder Tag off the Tapu Lele he got from the Ultra Ball, looking for a supporter for turn 1. And it's going to be interesting to see if he knows that James is playing Zoroark, because you want to know that, okay, my Marshadow GX is in the deck, I have enough Night Marchers to play around, and look, he gets this off the Wonder Tag, and depending on James' hand, this could really hurt him turn 1.
Right. I mean, this is such a strong play that we've been seeing all weekend, and it comes a lot of the times from a deck like Night March.
Whoa, okay. Getsus hits the special charge, but that's a card he does not need. His hand is looking beautiful with double Bridget, double Zoroark GX, and a double Colorless. That means with a double Colorless, he can actually knock out the Joltik that's in the active spot and set up multiple Zoroarks in the coming turns.
Absolutely. That was a big play from Admassu, being able to see James's hand and see the resources that he has. He knows that if he wants to actually stop that knockout from the Tapu Lele, he wants to try to find a way to get that Joltik out of the active position. Because you don't really want to give Zoroark those free prizes early when you have such weak attackers that are, so susceptible to early damage like this here.
So we see a double colorless on the Joltik and a pass, but it's really just kind of sacrificing it to the Tapu Lele. And there we see the Bridget from James, and you see him eyeing that Alolan Grimer. One of the things that's really bad against, or really bad for Zoroark, is Marshadow GX, and Alolan Muck, its ability to negate basic Pokemon's abilities, just completely shuts it down.
Yeah, he stops that strategy in its tracks if he's able to actually get the Muck up before the Marshadow is actually able to come into play. Something you see a lot of the times from the Zoroark player is they may not even come active and start putting pressure on them until they have that Alolan Muck up because of that exact thing. They want to make sure that there's not really any chance for Admassu to have a free early 2 prizes with Marshadow, because being that he only has to do 120 damage base before knocking out the Zoroark due to weakness and everything, which really is not difficult. That's 2 battle compressors from a Night March player, and that's it.
And we see James actually drew another Zorua for the turn, attaches the double colorless to the Tapu Lele, and Energy Drive will take a knockout here. He actually attacks with the Tapu Lele, and there it goes. Turn 1, take a prize, and it's now 5-6 in James' favor, and also doesn't have much in play. He's going to have to rely on a big turn 2.
Absolutely. That Ultra Ball off the top is really going to help him try to keep the plays and everything going here, knowing that he's only got that Getsus to be able to get back from the VS Seeker either which way. Interesting, though, to see James take that first knockout. That's actually something you usually see from the Night March's player side. Usually they're the ones that might take a knockout on the first turn, being that they attack primarily with basics. So completely different way we would expect that game to kind of open up, because Admassu opened with the Joltik and allowed him to get that knockout with the Tapu Lele there.
Alright, here we see the Ultra Ball from Admassu trying to discard that Choice Band, but that's rough because Choice Band is one of the cards that help you hit those easy numbers on Zorak GX.
Right, and even though the players do both actually play a copy of her full set of Puzzle of Time, there's actually only one choice band usually in the Night Marcher's deck, so putting it in the discard pile makes it easier access for the Puzzle of Time, but you are going to have to waste one if you ever want to use it against them.
And there we see a card that has been a staple in Night March ever since it came out, and that is Shaman EX, using its setup ability to draw until he has 6, and he drew into a Battle Compressor. This is another card that has fueled this Night March deck, being able to discard 3 cards from your deck, and really, most of the time it's just like, I'm going to discard 3 Lampins.
Yeah, that's usually some of the first plays that you're going to see, but it's actually a really big card for him there. Because he's got that VO Seeker in his hand with right now only having the Gets This option. So besides being able to put the Night Marchers in there, this will allow him to put something like maybe a Professor Sycamore, a Chorus, whatever supporter he wants to actually use for the turn, because he knows James doesn't have any items, so playing the Gets This would effectively not do anything. Not even effectively, just won't do anything, because you know he's just sitting on the Bridget double Zorak hand, which is a really, really strong hand for James, knowing that he's got a guaranteed double Zorak GX next turn, plus having an additional Zora ready on the bench. Sure, he may not actually have a draw supporter or anything like that, because we know he drew the Zora off the top of the deck, but it almost makes you want to end here from Admassu's position, because you don't really want your opponent to get 2 Zoraks and play just for free like that.
How do you like a Hex Maniac play? That would have been pretty good too.
Honestly, if he had more going for him, I would have loved to see a Hex Maniac there. But the only problem is that he wouldn't really be advancing his own board state, so he would really just end up attacking with Tapu Lele into the other one.
And oh no, he played the Sycamore and forgot to attach the double colorless energy.
He chose actually not to put it on his own Tapu Lele, so he's seeming to go for a more aggressive playstyle here potentially, so he really wants to actually use his Night Marchers to take the knockouts rather than going in with his own Wonder Tag to be able to trade here. So he was really expecting to get another double colorless energy, it feels like, this turn, so that he could start going in on the aggressive with his Night Marchers.
But remember, he is down 2 double colorless now with the attachment to the Joltik turn 1, and the way this Zorak deck tries to combat Admassu is, like, I'll let you use a few of your resources, and then I'll come in with the Seismitoad EX,
Right.
and just hope you can't recover.
Right. And especially if you're using that Seismitoad EX on things like Joltik or anything else, you know, it really can put a damper on your opponent, because you get to take free prizes as well as set them up to not be able to use your items, and hopefully right after a Karen, so that they don't have those Night Marchers or any way to be able to put them in the discard going forward.
And there we see an unfortunate Puzzle of Time, just a single copy, meaning he only has 3 left, and the odd number kind of makes it a little rough, because you really need those cards to get back your resources, like the 2 double colorless in the discard. But there we see a special charge off that Shaman EX.
Those were some pretty good draws there from Admassu. He drew the special charge that you just mentioned. He drew an Ultra Ball that he can actually use to get rid of the other Pumpkin Blue in his hand. Drew the Battle Compressor that, of course, he knew was on top of the deck from the Puzzle of Time. So if he had a way to get out of the access spot in a double colorless, that would actually really be all he needs to be able to potentially just take a knockout on this Tapu Lele. It's incredible. You can never really count a Night March deck to not be able to do anything on the following turn, because he just had that board of a Tapu Lele at the start, and he was really, really close to being able to actually knock out a Tapu Lele.
Yeah. He only has 1 copy of Floatstone. He's definitely looking for that here right now.
Don't know that he'll be able to get it just because he's got that full bench, so even if he wants to put down the third Shaman and try to commit here, I don't really see that being an option, so probably just going to see a pass on his end. Interesting to see if he decides to play the Battle Compressor or hold it for the next turn, but he does opt to pass it back to James.
I do like holding it, especially knowing the matchup. And there we see the first Zorak GX coming down, trade, discarding the Bridget that is not needed. And I actually can't. He drew a Tapu Lele. That is amazing. That means he has access to another supporter this turn.
And the best part is that as soon as that Alolan Muck comes down, it's going to render the Tapu Lele to be completely useless afterwards. So the fact that he's able to get use out of it now is going to be something that just helps his deck have less dead cards and everything later in the game, which you don't really have a lot of an issue with when playing Zorak, just because of the tradability, but definitely going to be.
There we see the second trade, discarding a Puzzle of Time, unfortunately, but he did draw into a Professor Sycamore.
James got a few different options here. Interesting to see where he decides to go with this turn. Does he just kind of start continuing to chip away with this Wonder Tag? It's going to be really difficult to see a one-shot, one-hit knockout. We would need a lot of cards from James's side. You would need Skyfield. You would need the additional basics, another double colorless energy. So it is definitely possible, but I don't know that he would really want to go aggressive this turn if he doesn't pull off a way to get out that Alolan Muck either way.
And there we see the second Tapu Lele GX from James. Wonder Tag, being able to search his deck for any supporter he chooses. It's looking like a Karen. This is one of the benefits of playing these single supporter cards in your deck. You're able to have access to them basically anytime you want.
And I even like that play this turn. He's already got the 2 Zoroarks on the board. He's already got a double colorless energy he can attack. There's not really a reason for him to advance his board state. Just playing a Karen, putting the Night Marches he's already got back into the deck, it's going to make it so that Masu again has to put a lot onto the board this turn to be able to really do anything. And after having his bench is full, can't put any additional Shamans down. So playing the Karen this turn really should make a dent on Admassu's strategy, even if it's only shuffling in a few Night Marchers. Wow, I think that was about
a few
8.
is like 8 or 9.
Yeah,
Like.
so it looks like it was even more than I would have expected. That was definitely a strong carrot on Admassu's part there to start off. And this is something that Night March has got to overcome. So, you play Night March in a regionals, you've got to know what you're going to be up against. You've got to know it's got to target its back. People are going to be playing cards like Karen, paired with Seismitoad. People are going to be playing cards like Oricorio. So, by this point of the tournament, he's already completed 9 rounds. He's on to round 10.
And
you got to hope. Wow!
There is the Alolan Muck coming down, shutting off that Marshadow GX. And any future plays that Admassu might try to make. And there is an Energy Drive 440.
That was a crucial move right there from James.
This has been a great 2 turns from James.
Absolutely. From a hand of just some Bridgets and Zoroarks, he was able... I didn't even see the Alolan Muck pop into his hand there. That was actually probably the last perfect card that James would have liked to see there to be able to really make sure that Karen did even more work than it actually ended up doing.
Well, even with that, if you look at his hand, he has a Professor Sycamore for next turn as well. I think that last trade got him the Alolan Muck and a Sycamore.
I think those were the exact 2 cards he drew, which was a fantastic way to be able to use that last trade there.
Also, I just gotta say, I love Alolan Muck. Its art is great. It's so rainbow and ugly looking, but I love it.
I really enjoy the new Alolan Pokemon. I really appreciated when they came out. It was a little bit of a different twist right there that they decided to go with. Alolan Muck, Alolan Executor, Alolan Ninetales, and Marowak. Those are actually some of my newest favorite Pokemon ever since some of them coming out.
Oh, for sure. And back on Admassu, he did save that Battle Compressor last turn for this turn, so he's kind of telegraphed, like, okay, I might get Karen'd. I need to make sure I have some recovery afterwards.
Right.
And looking at his hand, it's looking pretty good. There's the Battle Compressor, an Ultra Ball, discarding a Night Marcher, and then he has a Sycamore as well.
He's definitely got plenty to follow up. He can even Ultra Ball getting another Night Marcher to put it into his hand, just to Sycamore it away. It's incredible how your opponent plays Karen, and just like that, you're already back to 5, maybe even more Night Marchers in the discard pile. Sure, you think that there's not really going to be a likely scenario where he knocks out this Tapu Lele, but he's got access to puzzle time. A simple Professor Sycamore into a double puzzle here can just grab Battle Compressor Choice Band, and if he finds a way to get that Tapu Lele out of the active, that'll be a knockout.
He's definitely also looking for that Floatstone to get out of the active spot. We do see 1 puzzle and a Trainer's Mail. I don't see much else that is of use this turn.
Don't know that he'll be able to take a knockout with a hand like that, but definitely, he could at least start some of the damage process with his own using, I can't even use Energy Drive. He did commit the energy to the Joltik, which, being on James's side, when you see that put down, if that Joltik doesn't come active this turn, if you see a Guzma from James taking out another DC on the bench, sure, he did get to use a special charge and everything already, but that's really going to be something crazy. Now, one thing for Admassu that he's got to feel uncomfortable about is because his bench is full, he hasn't had a spot to put down a Zero of his own. That's something that Night March players really, really like when trying to combat Karen, because it's a way to consistently discard a Night Marcher, at least one every turn, while drawing additional cards, especially as they start to get something like Seismitoad EX to go on the board, because it's one of the few ways to discard Night Marchers without using Battle Compressor or any other item cards.
Yeah, and there we just see a pass from Admassu, action back on James. We'll see if he does have access to that Guzma, but I believe he just has that Sycamore. He does have access to a couple trades to try to dig for it.
I'd love to see what's going to be happening here. See if he decides to go for, the play of looking for that Guzma.
Well, he all in
think
right now,
actually
discarding Sycamore for trade.
Yeah, he decides, you know what, I'm just going to win. He does have, of course, always the VS Seekers and everything, so VS Seeker will get him back Karen and back Sycamore, so...
Oh, and we see the Execute finally draw into James' hand.
And I see a computer search from James, so he's going to be able to pull off whatever play he wants this turn to be able to put as much pressure on the board on Admassu's side. If he wants to take a knockout on top of Lele, I can see it happening. If he wants to take a knockout on the Joltik, I can see it happening. If he wants to get a Seismitoad out in Quaking Punch this turn, I wouldn't even be able to be shocked if that happens, because that computer search combined with the flexibility and everything else that you see in Zorak and the fact that he hasn't even played a supporter this turn really just opens up the possibility for James's turn right here.
Exactly. We do see the double colorless come down on the fresh Zorak from Breakthrough with its stand-in ability, being able to freely rush into its active spot. And we see the computer search getting a Versus Seeker, I believe.
Now, you don't even have to show the card to your opponent, but James just said, you know what, I'm in such a commanding board state that, here, look, I've got the VS Seeker. I'm going to play it anyways. Let's lay it down. I'd love to see if he's going to just say, let's Karen again. See if he's going for the
I think
hand.
it has to be a Karen, right?
I don't know. We're going to...
Yeah, we see him bring the Execute back to his hand. That's one thing people kind of forget, because if you Karen your Execute back in your deck, you kind of just nerf your setup a little bit.
Right. You want to actually end up holding him, which at that point, you make yourself a little bit vulnerable to an end, but at least force your opponent to play it. So seeing plays like that really makes me feel confident in the player when they make sure to do all the sequence and everything right. But the Karen does come down. The 5 Night Marchers that Admassu worked so hard to put back in the discard pile last turn, right back in the deck.
Unfortunately, he can't bring the Execute back because of Alolan Muck.
So I guess not too big of a deal. Doesn't have to worry about it anyway since the power is shut off at all. But really interesting to see that the Zorak Breakthrough is the one that he went with the double colorless on. It's already going to be able to take a knockout on the top of Lele because of the stand-in ability, and it's a non-EX-GX attacker, which when you're playing against Night March is something you really want to be able to try to use effectively as all of your non-EX-GX attackers, so that they're not just taking the better trades when knocking out things like Zorarks and Tapu Lele.
And there we go, stand-in from James. And we will see a Mind Jack take the knockout on Tapu Lele, thanks to Admassu's full bench.
Joltik's coming up, and because, thankfully it is that Joltik, since Zorak does resist Psychic, so if you went with the Pumpkaboo, it would actually need an extra Night March to be able to take a knockout. But Admassu doesn't have any Night Marches in the discard pile because he just got Karen last turn. He's not going to have access to basic abilities, so he can't use anything like Shaman. So he's going to have to put a fresh 5 Night Marches in the discard pile again if he really wants to be able to take a knockout on this Zorak Breakthrough.
Yeah, I think he's actually down 3 Battle Compressors, at least 2, 3, and then 1 Puzzle of Time as well. He does have a giant hand, but having the right combination of cards to be able to set up and maybe even try to power through another Karen that could possibly hit the board next turn.
Yep.
It's a lot to ask for from Admassu in his Night March deck.
Now, it's going to be... I'm kind of shocked to see that Joltik hit the bench, because again, if you're Admassu, I really feel like you want to get that Zorua down, because if these Karens keep going and keep going, you've got to be able to use your own Zorak at some point. You've got to be able to either... It's an attacker that doesn't rely on your discard pile, so it gives you something to do on the turns that they Karen you if you don't have your own way to take knockouts. You can use your opponent's Skyfield if he puts it into play to fill up your own bench and even discard your own Night Marches afterwards by knocking out the stadium. But let's see what the Sycamore brings into his hand, see what kind of resources he's able to get.
Got a couple of Night Marches and a Dowsing Machine, which could prove pretty well for Admassu here.
If he even has 1 Night Marcher in hand, he could actually pull off the knockout by grabbing a Battle Compressor with that.
And like you've been saying, with the Zorak and its trade ability with the deck to help keep it from fighting these Karens every turn. Night March has been a deck that's gone through so many changes because it's been out for a while, and it's always been very dominant. I started out with Archies and Empoleon. That's what the Zorak reminds me of, with Empoleon's diving draw, right? And being able to discard just draw 2, it really helped out the deck, and that's what we see with this Zorak GX now. And Admassu Machine is getting that Battle Compressor, like you said.
And it's crazy to see how far it really has come because Empoleon has the same ability as Zorak, and actually a very similar attack as well. One that's
Yeah.
based off the field of both players, but Zorak's attack is a little bit better. And but how much of a power creep has come? In order to get Empoleon out, it was either a stage 2, or you had to play Archie's Ace in the Hole, a card that you had to build your entire deck around just to be able to make it work consistently, because you had to have no hand in order to play Archie's Ace in the Hole and get that Empoleon out. But now, they just have access to Zorak GX, a theoretically better Empoleon that's just a stage 1. So you went from having to go through an Archie's combination to get something out to have that consistency engine to let me just evolve into a stage 1 and I can get that same consistency engine that we had a long time ago.
And there we see a Night March with 6 Night Marchers in the discard. That is more than enough to knock out the Zoroark from Breakthrough. And James promotes the Tapu Lele with double colors. Remember, this is just an easy prize knockout on the Joltik. Joltik only has 30 HP, even though it does so much damage.
Right, so definitely you're going to see Admassu go down to at least 2 prizes on this turn. And this game has really been a little bit backwards in the sense of how it usually goes. It's usually you see the Night March player take the early lead, go aggressive, take a couple prizes. Zorak player then has to see if they can find a way to make the comeback using their Toad Karen or whatever combination of cards they're able to. But it completely went the opposite way. James decided to take the lead. He's going to be up 4 prizes to 5 by the end of, or excuse me, 2 prizes to 5 at the end of this turn. So it's going to be kind of difficult for Admassu. He's got 3 turns. He has to take at least 3 turns to be able to win the game minimum. And James just has those 2 prizes in the meantime that he has to be able to lock up Game 1 of Day 2 Dallas Regionals.
And this is why Alolan Muck is so good in this matchup, shutting off that Marshadow GX, taking away Zorak's biggest weakness against this deck is that fighting weakness. And there we see a Skyfield come down from James.
Yeah, definitely a Skyfield, despite the fact that I cannot see that card whatsoever. I have to assume it was a stadium, and the only one that he plays is Skyfield, so we're going with that.
Double colorless coming down on the Zorak GX. And he is looking very good here. Playing the Sudowoodo, again, it has no effect because of the Alolan Muck, so it's just kind of there.
Something that he can put on his bench. Zorak does need additional Pokemon to be able to attack, and he's not even really limiting himself because he still has that Skyfield in play, so he can put whatever he wants on the bench at this point.
One cute interaction is if he gets a couple more Pokemon down in play, you can actually discard Alolan Muck later on in the game if he chooses, like, I might need a Tapu Lele in a little bit,
Right.
or I might need a Propagation with Execute. And there's the Energy Drive taking the knockout on the Joltik. Down to 2 prizes now for James, and Admassu's really on the back foot here.
It really is crazy, though, as you were mentioning, with the being able to knock your own Alolan Muck off and stuff like that. Zorak decks have so many crazy sequencing that they can do as the games go on. Because they have cards like Puzzle of Time, being able to knock out your own stadium, there's so many plays that are available to it that's why we're seeing, besides the consistency level, so many top-level players choosing to arm themselves with that Zorak deck, because there's just so many options that you can pull. You almost can find yourself a way out of any situation if the cards can fall into your lap in the right direction.
And remember now that since James just played a Hex Maniac last turn, he did not have access to that Karen, meaning there's 7 Night Marchers in the discard. And Admassu is just a Choice Band away from taking a knockout on the Tapu Lele, but he discarded the Choice Band earlier on in the game, so he'll need a couple more Night Marchers in the discard to actually take a knockout.
He does not have a copy of Teammates in the discard pile. Unfortunately for Admassu, he is going to go with the Sycamore this turn. But if he had had Teammates, he could have just grabbed the double Puzzle of Time, grabbed the Choice Band, and the knockout's already set up and ready for him here.
And there we see off the Sycamore, discarding both of his Zorak GX. It's been a thing that's been plaguing him all game, is not being able to get Zora in play.
I think it's really going to make a big impact. Going into Game 2, if it finishes the way it's looking right now, one thing we're going to want to see from Admassu is really just making sure he prioritizes getting those Zoruas in play, because combating the Karen otherwise is just so difficult.
And he's like, if you have the Guzma, you win. And James shows him the Guzma. He will be able to take a knockout on a Shaman or a Marshadow GX. And James takes Game 1 in pretty decisive fashion. being
Absolutely.
able to take a knockout almost every turn. And not only that, but Karen probably like turn 2 like to 4.
Right. He was able to be able to see the Zorak deck still set up while playing a carrot on turn 2 and turn 3, hindering the Night March player's setup and taking prizes at the same time. That's pretty impressive, and it's really going to be difficult for Admassu to keep up if James is able to keep setting up just like that. Admassu has to be able to get that Marsh Shadow going faster. He's got to be able to either deal with the Alola Muck or just disregard it and be able to put the pressure with the other cards, get his own Zorak GX into play, whatever he needs to do. Because otherwise, he's going to end up at the 7-2-1 record, and James is going to end up 8-1-1 going into the Dallas Regionals Day 2.
All right, so speaking of Day 2, we haven't really talked about the field that much, but there's quite a variety of decks in
Absolutely.
these 38 players remaining. And remember, they had to combat over 1,000 players to get to this point. That means their decks are the epitome of consistency. They needed to make sure, I need those 21 match points to make it. They got there, and do you have any favorite decks in the field right now?
Well, I got to say, I got to be a little bit biased. I'm going to put a little bit of favoritism here on Sam Huff. He's the only player that took Greninja Break deck into the top 38s, and I'm always got a little bit of a soft spot for Greninja here. You know, it's a deck that I'm super fond of. If I was playing in the tournament, it would have been one of my top 3 options because it has such a strong matchup against Night March, a giant water shuriken, and the other shuriken being able to take a prize every turn as you take out Night Marchers. Shadow Stitch being, he's definitely going to be one of my favorites to kind of keep an eye on as the day goes on.
Yeah, for me, it's actually the fact that there is 2 of the Shocklock decks where we saw it earlier on in Day 1, Round 3, and 2 of them made it into Day 2, and I'm going to be excited to see if they hit the right matchups and could go even deeper in the tournament.
And I got to say, as much as I love the Shocklock deck, I'm going to be excited to watch it play other decks, but if we get to that point in the tournament, both will make it into top 8, and what if they both have to play each other?
Oh, no.
That is just going to be a grueling, grindy game, and it's going to be from Ross Coughlin, the creator of the deck himself, Jonathan Perinato, the other pilot, somebody who's always known to be an X-Files partner with Ross. That will be an intense matchup if it actually goes down.
Oh, definitely. And here we see action on Game 2. James does start the Seismitoad EX. So that's a good and a bad thing, right? Because it's very good in this matchup, but early game it might seem a little awkward.
It is, but at least he has ways of being able to recover it if it gets knocked out. At the same time, he could theoretically just pull off some decisive plays on his first couple turns. You could even be as bold as just say, all right, you put a couple Night Marches in your discard pile first turn. I'm just going to go for the first turn, Quaking Punch Karen. You know, sometimes Night March is so susceptible to the item lock that that's really all you need to do to be able to beat the deck. Now, granted, Admassu is playing Ranger. He does get to go first. He sees the Seismitoad, so he should be able to do his best to try to play around the Quaking Punch. His hand's pretty stacked up. He grabbed a Dowsing Machine off that Trainer's Mail, so with this Battle Compressor, it actually kind of turns it into its own little mini computer search. He can grab whatever card in the deck that he wants this turn, so he's really going to be able to set himself up to be able to combat that Seismitoad's Quaking Punch next turn.
I believe I see a Puzzle Time in his hand as well, and a few other cards that are pretty good. And with this Battle Compressor, he's definitely looking to discard a couple Night Marchers because you want to get that Seismitoad off the field as fast as you can.
As fast as possible, because there's too much devastation that can come of that card. It's going to slow Admassu down way too much, even if it doesn't stop him completely in his tracks. If it just slows Admassu down enough that James is able to get a setup going like he did last game, that's just the Seismitoad has pulled its weight and done what it needs to do.
All right, and he's going deep in the tank here for this Battle Compressor. It made me think he might be eyeing up a supporter as well.
I see he's got the Getsus on the top of his deck. He's thinking about it, but you got to be a little wary after the first game. It didn't go so well for you.
That gets us for one, and then him revealing, I got the best start I possibly could have. Like,
definitely not something you want to play into again, but at the same time, it's a much more comfortable card to play if your hand is really strong otherwise. So sure, you want to get as many cards as you can off the Getsus, but if your hand's already looking good, it's a little bit more of a risk that you can kind of take, knowing that you can maybe play a Shame and draw a few more cards, whatever you need to do to be able to keep yourself going. in case it doesn't go the way you want it to.
And there we see off the Battle Compressor discarding the Pokemon Ranger, a card that is probably the best card he can play against Seismitoad, and the Getsus as well as a Joltik. And remember, we were talking about usually you
It's
discard.
happening again.
Oh no. One card, and it's not even a card he was going to play next turn.
Nope. And you see the double colorless energy in his hand. You see the supporter, so you know if he wants the Quaking Punch next turn, he's going to be able to do it. Sure, it's not that crazy hand that we saw last game of Bridget and everything else, but he's got to draw a supporter. He's got the double colorless energy, so James is going to be able to at least go something live next turn. Interesting to see what Admassu does to try to set himself up to be able to counter that.
Yeah, and I was saying before, he discarded the Joltik, and we were talking about usually you discard Lampent because they're the ones you can't use. But
Right.
it's kind of interesting because with Marshadow and its Shadow Hunt ability, it copies the attack of a basic Pokemon in the discard. So if you put a Lampent in, you can't attack with Marshadow.
Right, because it has 3 energy to use Night March as opposed to Joltik. He's the only one that has that 2 energy cost.
Well, it's also a stage 1.
That is a good point. That is another reason. Yes.
All right, and looking at Admassu's hand, it doesn't really seem like much now. He's probably going to try to use this dowsing machine, but he has a few just supporters in hand and a Shaman and too many cards in hand to actually use the Shaman to its full effect.
Right. I mean, he does get the dowsing machine to drop a couple cards first, but he's got a lot of good resources in his hand. He's not really, he can get rid of a Night Marcher, but he doesn't really have any on his bench right now. So it's gonna be interesting to see where he ends up going with all these.
And here is the Battle Compressor again, and one card we saw in his hand was that Zoroark GX as well, but no sign of Zorua yet again. At least at this moment, and there's the 3 Lampent. He's like, okay, I got my attacker in the discard. Now I can throw these cards that are useless to me.
Right. You don't want to ever draw into the Lampents because you can't do anything with them. You can't evolve out of them. Nothing. You hope you don't prize them because they're the last prizes you really want to see. So if they're in the discard pile, they're where you want them.
And here we see
He's got 5 Night Marchers in the discard pile already. James hasn't even gotten a chance to take a turn yet, and he's already got a Night March ready to do 100 damage. Incredible how much force this Night March deck actually really has.
and that is not what you want to see. Puzzle of Time, looking at the top 3, only to find another Puzzle of Time.
That's the most, as a player, when you're playing Puzzle of Time, that's like the most infuriating situation to happen, and it happens way more often than you'd expect. It's the next card. He was about to play a Shaman to draw. Such a punish, but realistically, you can argue he's making the right play. It's just every once in a while, you take the risk reward, and it doesn't necessarily go the way you want it to.
All right, here is the setup, and oh yeah, that was unfortunate because he could have set up, probably drawn into the puzzle. Oh no, that is heartbreaking.
He does hit a double colorless energy, so he's going to be able to get the attachment for turn. Now, one of my favorite things about March Shadow is it's such an open card. It does more than just Night March in this deck. It's such a great counter to Seismitoad EX as well. So as long as he doesn't get that Alolan Muck out, he can do things like, all right, this turn, I'm going to use Night March and do 100. Oh, you hit my Marsh Shadow and I'm almost knocked out? Well, let me put this Shaman EX in my discard pile, and I'm just going to Sky Return my Marsh Shadow. Put it right back into my hand, negate all the damage that you've done with Quaking Punch, because as much as Quaking Punch has the amazing effect of dropping item cards, it only does 30 damage, so it's not going to be taking out that Marsh Shadow anytime soon.
And here we see another setup from the second
No
Shaman EX.
Zorua. Really was hoping we were going to see that Zorua there.
Yeah, and I was thinking before, he didn't have the Zoroark in hand, it was the Tapu Lele. They just all look similar with that Rainbow Rare.
Interesting to see that he's going the one tag. It looks like here.
That was before the Shaman and stuff like that, yeah. And I think we see just a pass, and now action is on James.
Now, interesting though, that he does decide to attach the double colorless energy right away. James is one of the lists that, for Zoroark, he is not playing any copies of Enhance Hammer. So that double colorless energy is pretty safe. It's not going anywhere, so you can feel confident for Admassu being able to attach it and not have to worry about it hitting the discard pile.
He also knows that an N is coming from James. Right. And there we see the Bunnelby, kind of a concession to, well, okay, if I don't draw anything off this N, there is a chance that you can have, like, a bunch of Night Marchers and a Sycamore in your hand.
Right.
And
you just don't want to lose a game like this. Not when you're in the second day. Not when you're already up a game. It just would be really sad to be able to just lose because you only had one basic and your opponent drew that hand like that. You don't want to even put yourself in that option.
and James with the N will be drawing 6. Definitely looking for some of his basic Pokemon, especially that Alolan Grimer to try to get that Buck set up next turn.
Yeah, on James's side, if he can find the Alolan Grimer and a copy of Zorua, that'll be everything that he would really want, because it's really unlikely for Admassu to be able to try to... If he only needs really one Zorua. If he pulls off a Guzma, that'd be pretty impressive when you're talking about under a Seismitoad lock, but here's exactly the situation you were talking about. The only other basic...
last card was the Ultra Ball, and he has the Alolan Muck in hand. It'll be interesting to see if he goes the Zorua route or the Alolan Grimer, but that Ultra Ball has definitely saved James right here.
Right. He almost was in that situation where he didn't have another basic early that he was going to want to put down. He does get to discard something like a Ranger and an Acerola. Cards that he's not really going to want too much in this matchup, especially the Pokemon Ranger. So nice to be able to put those in the discard pile early so you don't have to worry about them coming up and clogging all your draws later in the game.
Yeah, usually that's what Zoroark is for. But
right.
He might just have to do it the old way. Like, okay, I guess I'll Ultra Ball these away.
Old school cards.
And there we see the Zorua definitely valuing consistency over shutting down this Marshadow, early game at least.
It'd be kind of worrisome putting the Alolan Muck because it obviously does shut down your basics too. So you've got the Tapu Lele in hand already. You know, you want to make sure that you don't put yourself in a bad position. You got to be able to use that Alolan Muck at the right time.
And there we see attacking with the Seismitoad, Waking Punch, 30 damage on the Marshadow, turning off any items for Admassu for his turn. And remember, that Pokemon Ranger is still in his discard, and not having access to Versus Seeker means he won't be able to combat this item lock.
Wow, and there's 3 copies of Ultra Ball in his hand. That would have been an explosive hand if he was able to use any of those item cards right there. Now, the good thing about Marshadow is, though, it's already doing enough damage that it will be a 2-hit knockout on the Seismitoad EX. So he is going to force James to play a Karen or something of that sort next turn if he doesn't want to fall to the Marshadow on the early turns of the game like this.
And one thing that Admassu did this game, which he did not get to do last game, is get that Zorua down on the bench.
Yep.
And there we see the Night March from Marshadow, thanks to Shadow Hunt, dealing 100 damage. And James now needs to find a way to get either Karen or just get set up a little bit more.
Right. If he's able to do either of those things, even if the Seismitoad goes down, he has ways of being able to pull it out later. You know, it's not the end of the world if that happens, but definitely needs to be able to pull a couple cards out this turn. He's got the Tapu Lele in his hand, so he can go for the Karen if he wants. I mean, this is the coveted play, the good old Seismitoad Karen. And Admassu didn't play anything last turn.
I think he actually just drew the Karen naturally as well.
Oh, yes. Looks like I think that was then his top deck. So who needs to play Tapu Lele? Well, you've got the Karen already in your hand. And interestingly enough that he did discard that Acerola then last turn, because this is one of those rare situations where Acerola is going to be actually a really useful card in this matchup. Night March, usually a deck that takes 1-hit knockouts. You don't see a lot of 2 hits and everything here, but at this point, Marshadow can't do any damage, so Admassu didn't play a single card last turn, which means if he wasn't telegraphing a bluff, then he's got to top deck something, or else he's just going to be sitting for a while, passing back to James.
And yeah, that is all James did was Karen and Quaking Punch, but most of the time, that's all you need against Night March.
He's got the Zorua on the bench already. He's got a Lele in his hand next turn, so he's going to be able to do more coming forward. It's really all up to Admassu at this point to see what he's able to do under this item lock. I didn't see a copy of Zoroark GX in his hand. If he even had just a Zoroark GX on the board, that alone would be enough to be able to at least keep him moving, drawing a couple extra cards a turn, finding a way to discard Night Marchers.
Knockout.
Right. But at this point, his hand, it's all a bunch of items and Night Marches, it looks like. I see 3 Ultra Balls, I see a Battle Compressor, a Lampent, a Pumpkaboo. There's really not much he's going to be able to do with this hand.
Oh, we could see an Energy Drive from the Tapu Lele, and with the 100 damage, that does take the knockout.
That's exactly what he needs to be a knockout. So he would have to commit, he would have to lose a double Colorless Energy off the Marshadow, but I gotta say, it's a much better play than just passing back.
Oh, for sure. And here we do see the retreat. Energy Drive from Tapu Lele taking the knockout, and James not playing much anything else last turn means he's gonna have to try to come back right now.
It's going to be very difficult for us to be able to see anything from James in the terms of being able to pull off a Quaking Punch again this turn. But I got to say, if he somehow can find a way to Quaking Punch again this turn, that would put Admassu, it would just kind of reset everything that just happened. And it would really be an interesting play. But I don't really know if you can Quaking Punch into a Tapu Lele. So really interesting from Admassu to be able to see him just say, hey, you want to use Seismitoad? I'm getting rid of my Marshadow. I'm just going to go with Energy Drive. Simple, linear attack that's going to be able to set up. It's a really good card against Seismitoad EX. One of the reasons why you don't see as many Seismitoad EX based decks is just because of cards like Tapu Lele. You're going to see so many of them in every deck anyways.
Yeah, one of the things in previous formats that actually hindered Seismitoad was Mewtwo EX,
Right.
with basically the same attack with X-Ball, and that was played in like half of the decks. But with Tapu Lele being played in 5% of every deck, it's really gonna put some hurt on Seismitoad EX.
It really does, because it's just a simple linear attack, but we at least see the Tapu Lele coming down from James' side as well. He did get that Zoroark GX, so he's got cards.
Oh,
he's going to be able to do a little
I
bit.
love this. He is eyeing that Getsus, the Team Plasma supporter card, and Quaking Punch was pretty good. It was kind of hindering Admassu a little bit, but it's also pretty good, just shuffling away all the items and then
Right.
drawing cards for that.
If you can't use the Quaking Punch, might as well get rid of him. Wow, I'd love to see what Admassu took off the prize cards here. If he didn't grab a supporter off that or the top of his deck, he's still going to be in that same
3,
position.
4, 5. Oh, he is left with just
3.
3 Night Marchers. Oh, this is rough right now.
You do not want to be in Admassu's shoes right now. He's living off the top of the deck, and
I also just want to say James did Getsus with 0 cards in hand, so he was fully relying on Admassu having just a bunch of items.
Right. I think even if he had just a couple of them, he at least still had the trade ability to be able to draw a couple more. But I agree, it's definitely a risky play. But you got to think, if your opponent's sitting there passing when you're using something like Quaking Punch, it means you're either chock full of Night Marchers, chock full of items. If there was a Sycamore, anything like that was in there, it would have been played down.
All right, here we see a trade from James, first trade of the game. I think he got another Zora. That's what he needs to see. He also has the double colorless energy, so he will be able to put some pressure on this turn.
And the Sudowoodo. I want to make note of that because Admassu already has a full bench. He doesn't have a Night Marcher on the board. He just has that Marshadow.
Oh.
So if he's able to lock him up with Roadblock and play a Karen, he's actually going to make it so that nobody can use Night March on the board, and he's going to have to use Sky Return, Energy Drive, Riotous Beating of his own. He's really going to have to work out of his usual conventional Night March strategy to be able to get himself out of this one.
And here we do see the Sudowoodo come down. The road is being blocked. And Riotous Beating dealing 100 damage to the Tapu Lele. And Admassu needs to draw a Sycamore here. And, okay.
Ooh, that was...
It wasn't a Sycamore, but it's still pretty good.
Arguably as good as a Sycamore. Because this is going to be something he's got for multiple turns. He gets to dump the extra Night Marches he's got in his hand. That was really one of the 2 best cards he probably could have found off the top of his deck.
And remember, he does have just the 3 Night Marchers in his hand, but thanks to trade, one of them will go to the discard, and we'll have to spin the wheel again. 2 brand new cards.
See if he's able to get his own supporter, something that's going to be able to put him into this position. But I believe, if there's no Alolan Muck in play, he's got Night Marchers. He's got to be able to put Night Marchers in the discard pile. That is the first one, but if he's able to even get 6 in a double colorless, it's not the hardest thing to do. If he were to draw a Sycamore off this trade, I can see that Zoroark actually getting knocked out, and it's the only one James even has on the board. So, while it's not the most likely scenario, Admassu really has a window here that if he's able to take advantage of it, could put James in a lot of trouble.
Well, again, it's all up to those 2 cards he drew, but with the hand face down on the table, doesn't look like...
I think I just
it's
see a
another
puzzle.
Night Marcher and a Puzzle of Time.
Ooh.
Ouch.
So this is going to be one of those where you got to decide, do I look at the top 3? It felt really bad when he did it last time. He's already got, I believe, 2 in the discard pile. He's got at least 1. It might even be 2.
I'm
so
going to go crazy if there's another puzzle on top. Okay.
But I believe, actually, that's the 3rd Puzzle of Time. So he just committed at that. If it is, then he just committed to saying, you know what? Once things hit the discard pile, outside of Via Seeker, my dowsing machine's already gone too. Not much else I'm going to be able to do to get him back.
And this is unfortunate. The top 3 cards, there is a double colorless, which he will need if he wants to attack with Marshadow, but 2 Night Marchers on top as well. That means, well, I can draw my card for my turn next turn, and then trade for 2 more cards.
Right.
But I still don't draw anything.
Right. I almost would have liked to see the puzzle held till next turn, be able to look 1 card deeper with that puzzle of time, because now those are the top 3. He's not getting farther than that next turn. So looking at that, as a player, I'm not really going to be able to do much next turn either. We might even see something like a Skyward turn next turn, because he's got to be able to get something out to be able to put some sort of pressure on James.
Yeah, well, thankfully, he is the one that's up in the prize trade right now, and Energy Drive putting 80 damage on Zoroark GX. But James drew a Colress for the turn, I believe. A card that has been such a powerhouse in Expanded, especially with all these Skyfield decks as well.
Already allowing him to draw 8 cards, better than a Sycamore or a Juniper. So, I could easily see that starting off his turn. Just hopefully to find him maybe another Zoroark GX, maybe another Zorua, maybe try to get that Alolan Grimer into play so that way I can puzzle a time my Alolan Muck. A lot of different things that you could really see from him on his end.
All right, there is the Rescue Stretcher looking for that Seismitoad EX.
It's interesting to see if he's just going to pull that and put it into his hand. He does have the Alolan Muck in there as well, so I wouldn't even be surprised if he goes for the shuffle option to be able to put both of them back into the deck, because as much as a Seismitoad is nice to be able to start using Quaking Punch again, I feel like you need to take out this Tapu Lele before you go back to that strategy.
All right, well, there is the Seismitoad hitting the hand and hitting the bench as well. Colress will be able to draw 9 cards, which we used to think was an insane number, 9, 10 cards off of 1 supporter. But then with Skyfield all that stuff, drawing 16 is pretty good too.
Yeah, those are the numbers that we're seeing now, and it's not even that uncommon. Probably the only reason that you don't see those 16s is because there's so many copies of Sudowoodo, all the roads are blocked to 16 cards.
Oh, man. All right, Kohler shuffling up for James. 9 brand new cards, and pending there is 100 on the Tapu Lele, so that's getting knocked out this turn.
Right. At this point, he's already got the knockout on the Tapu Lele. The only things he really wants to see is another Zoroark, which I can already see in his hand, maybe another Zorua, maybe the Alolan Grimer. There's only so much to ask for, but still has a trade ability and everything ready to go, so he's going to be able to do some more this turn.
And he draws 1 card that I love in Expanded that doesn't really get much due diligence. That's Pokemon Communication. It's a card that, especially in evolution decks, stage 1 and stage 2 decks, okay, well, I drew one of the guys that I don't really need right now, but I also don't want to, but then I'll shuffle him back in, get a card.
I completely forget about that card. All the Skyfield in play, so he's able to bet right away.
And there we do see the Alolan Grimer coming down.
Still has trade ability, ready to go. He doesn't have the Alolan Muck or anything. He's going to have to use Puzzle of Time to get it back.
Yeah, unfortunately, using the rest,
he gets that non-EX or non-GX attacker on the board like he wanted, and he can even get his Zoroark GX out of harm's way. So this is pretty nice that he doesn't have, because he's got that Marshadow on the bench, even though it has 60 damage on it, and Masu's very likely going to be able to take a knockout, and you don't really want him going to 2 prizes already. You'd rather make him work for as much as you can, so being able to use Standard to take
the deck can be.
And Masu is just conceding. He knows the top 3 cards of his deck. He knows there's nothing he's going to be able to do. Looks like, I believe he just shook his hand to concede.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's going to be James Taylor.
Guzma. Okay, it didn't even really matter.
That would have been it. 2 turns away, he could have gotten something, but probably would have just been too late. Incredible. A short series, but back and forth from both players. Seismitoad and Karen really making an impact. James Taylor would advance to 8-1-1. 5 additional rounds to go. What do we think? 33, 34 points is going to be what he needs to make it. Really crazy way to end that series.
Yeah, and remember, Admassu is not out of it yet, but he will have to try to do a little bit more work, and especially with the target that Night March had on its back coming into this tournament, taking 3 of the top 4 spots in San Jose regionals, meaning everyone's going to have something a little spicy for against him.
And I got to say, Night March is as popular as it is. It's just a small percentage compared to the amount of Zoroark, but Nonetheless, with how few Night March actually sees play, because top caliber players consistently go back to the deck, you still see it breaking into the top 32 at almost every single event. There's several in this top cut as well, piloted by players such as Admassu right there. We've got Connor Finton playing it in day 2. It's almost guaranteed that we're going to see it in the next couple of rounds